Well, you know what the majority of people watching this are going to say, don't you? They're going to say, you've done the crime, you do the time, and being in prison means that you do surrender your human rights. You haven't lost them forever, you regain them when you go out of jail, but just as you're not allowed to go home on Christmas Eve to put the presents out for the kids, just as you're not allowed to go to the circus, you're not allowed to have people come and visit you for sex. And you're certainly not allowed to father children who you can have no real part in their upbringing. It's part of the deal. You do the crime, you go to jail, you forfeit your human rights while you're in jail.
You don't. Once you enter prison, yes, you committed crime, but you don't stop being a person. And the last thing you want to do is dehumanise people. And prisoners we're not allowed to vote, so we're not on the government's agenda. So prisoners should be given the basic human right to father children whilst behind bars. If you've been in a relationship for 15 years and your partner has stayed by you through these whilst you're in prison, right? Why should she be punished for your criminality?
So, well, that's the whole point, isn't it? That families are damaged by the criminal behaviour of one of their members, and it's inevitable. Just by the very fact of the partner going to jail, that's damaging. And if you constantly try and compensate the family by allowing the kinds of acts that you're talking about, whether it's sex in jail, whether it's the right to vote and all the rest of it, you're actually diminishing the effect of the punishment. It's not really prison anymore. It's actually open prison.
No, I completely disagree. Like I say, relationships in prison are key to reducing reoffending, right? Lord Farmer himself states that prisoners who receive visits whilst in prison are 39% less likely to reoffend, right? What society needs to remember is 99% of prisoners, unless serving a whole life tariff, are going to be reintroduced into society at some point. Mm-hmm. If you was, as a free man on the land, living on a council estate up in Manchester, where I'm from, mm-hmm. You're not going to get that postcode lottery when it comes to IVF treatment. But if I lived in a nice suburb of London, say Mayfair or something, you're more likely to get that offer. So when you're in prison, you've probably got more you've probably got more chance of getting IVF whilst in prison than I believe you have as a free man on the land.
But aren't you in prison to be punished? And being punished means being treated unfairly, doesn't it? I mean, being punished means having your rights snatched off you and only given back when it's been decided that you've paid your debt to society. It's about punishment and deterrence. Without punishment, you don't have deterrence.
But you're serving your sentence, you're in prison, right? So I believe it should be like a carrot and stick sort of approach. Conjugal visits, for example, you've got to be in the relationship a set amount of time. Your behavioural, there's a behavioural scheme in prison called incentives, earn privileges. Mm-hmm. It's a behavioural scheme, right? If you're a model prisoner in prison and you are not partaking in the drugs and the violence that's an epidemic within our jails, and you're a model prisoner and it's showing that you're going from a off-the-track thug to a law-abiding citizen through it. You're being changed and you're being rehabilitated, if you will. Why shouldn't you get this right?
Well, Mr. Hayes, it's certainly true, isn't it, that in Denmark they allow conjugal visits, which means that prisoners can become new fathers or sometimes first-time fathers, and they say, to back his argument, they say that the reoffending rates in Denmark in prisons that allow that they fall away.
So in the UK,
may well be true.
It's 44.7%, and in Denmark, 29% reoffending rate.
It may well be true, but what I'm concerned about is IVF. And what it means is it will be a slap in the face for all those people who cannot get IVF in this country on the NHS. My daughter is one of those
Wouldn't they just
people.
join the queue?
No, they wouldn't just join the queue. They would jump the queue because they don't have to have the same criteria. Do you know, 73% of all trusts, NHS trusts, do not give IVF treatment. The majority of people can't afford to pay for it. It means the majority of people don't get it. That is a breach of their human right. But also, may I just correct one thing, Richard? You don't lose your human rights when you're in prison, you lose your freedom. Because we have to treat people in a civilised way.
Well, I'm sure
somebody we don't at the moment.
As Cody said then, the human right to have a family, though, to have a family life, yes. and for some prisoners that would be denied.
Yes, of course, and the government has, as you say, rightly, had 11 people given that opportunity. But for really serious offences, and we're talking about a guy who's serving 31 years, in the words of the judge, for a brutal murder. No, I'm sorry, it is just plain wrong, and it's a slap in the face for those decent, law-abiding people who actually want to have children.
So you think for you it's clear-cut, under no circumstances should this be allowed?
I think under European law it can't be as clear-cut as that. What they have to do is we have to take account of what the European Court of Human Rights have actually said. And so the judge has to, the ministers have to go through various tests. But of course, the test for having IVF is, one, you've got to have your wife or partner between 23 and 39, and you've got to be trying to have a child for 2 years. years, which means having sex. That can't possibly happen in prison.
And do you think there shouldn't be conjugal visits at all, that all should be banned?
I'm really talking about IVF. Conjugal visits, provided I think you can sort out the security, which would be difficult for Category A prisoners, the really most serious people, is a tricky one. So I can see that.
Well, you said a tricky one, of course it is, but do you think it's a good idea?
I don't think it's a bad idea,
Really?
as long as it's manageable. Oh, yeah. It's the IVF problem I'm particularly concerned.
So hang on. So you're saying that you would accept that in British prisons you'd basically have a sex wing, and I don't think sexual. No, I'm serious. Not a sexual offenders wing, but a part of the prison where there are rooms where prisoners can take their wives and girlfriends and have sex.
I think it is something that should be looked at. I'm not saying it's a particularly good idea.
Do you think the public would back that?
Oh no, the public won't back it at all, and that's why the government won't do it. There's no votes. There's no votes in any of this for anybody.
Talking about
the inner Daily Mail. Sorry, Charlotte. The inner Daily Mail will just say no. But I mean, it has worked in some places.
I think it's unfair to the Daily Mail. I think that probably most Daily Mirror readers would say no as well.
Oh, well, I don't think unfair to the Daily Mail.
Just taking a look, talking about public opinion, people getting in touch this morning because, you know, overwhelmingly, those people have been getting in touch to say that they don't believe this. Diane, rights for prisoners don't make me laugh. They lost their rights when they committed a crime. Ed, I'm horrified at the idea prisoners should be allowed IVF treatment and regular sex visits with their wives and partners. Jake, isn't it the point of prison that you lose your freedom? I mean, you know, overwhelmingly, Cody, those people getting in touch say no, they don't believe that prisoners should have this right.
But who are these people to play God with prisoners' lives? The biological clock is ticking. You've committed crime, you're in prison. That's the punishment, right? Your partner's not done anything wrong. She stood by you. Like I say, an incentive for good behaviour. It would reduce violence within our prisons. It would reduce the people coming down from drugs and violence within our jails, earn the right to actually go forward for this treatment. And you're more likely, I believe, to get it in prison than you are living in a council estate with a postcode lottery when it comes to IVF treatment.
In your experience, I think, what was your last prison? Was it Strangeways?
Yeah, Forest Bank, yeah.
Forest Bank, OK. Yeah. How many years have you done inside?
I've done 2 years over 3 stretches.
OK, and in your day-to-day experience, how big an issue is this behind bars? I mean, are prisoners saying, I want to be a daddy? Or is this more of a theoretical argument?
Well, it's only happened 10 times where IVF has been granted over in a 50-year period.
So it's very rare, isn't it?
So it's extremely rare.
Yeah.
So this isn't going to be the done thing. But when it's been denied, compensation's been sought, and in the region of about £18,000. Well,
listen, you've been out for 2 years. Have you turned your life around?
I've turned my life around, yeah. And I'm never going back. But for me, I'm all about prisoners because, like I say, with fewer police on the streets, I want prisons to work for society. I want human rights for prisoners because the fact is we're not on the government's agenda. If you can father a child whilst behind bars, conjugal visits would reduce violence within our prisons, which can only be seen as a good thing. And for all the families out there that are suffering and struggling and stuff like that, I believe that prisoners, I do genuinely feel very strongly that you're more likely to get it behind bars, citing your human rights, than you are living on a council estate.
What about the families of the victims? What about the families? That man we're talking about, I think his name is Aaron Newman, who said it's his human right.
Very quickly, yep.
So, human right. The mother says, you murdered my daughter.
Yes, absolutely.
You murdered my daughter. Okay. And what sort of child would you bring up? What sort of child would you bring up?
Well, I think we know that based on the messages that you read out, that most of you don't agree with this. But if you do agree with it, tell us now. I'd like to hear the argument, because I thought you advanced some interesting arguments there, actually.
Cody, Jerry, thanks both very much. Well, we do have a statement from the Ministry of Justice. They don't comment on individual cases, but a spokesperson said the small number of prisoners requesting access to IVF are subject to a strict assessment, including the risk they pose and their relationship with their partner, and permission is given extremely rarely. All additional costs for facilitating the treatment are met by the prisoner.
And I would defend myself. I think you do lose your human rights when you go to jail, because you lose your liberty, and that's a human right. But we could argue that on the head of a pin for the rest of the show.